Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of ANCAP Radio. I'm your host, Adam Carswell, and today we are joined by an absolute legend of the game in the world of libertarianism, anarcho-capitalism, and beyond, Tom Woods. We are currently getting him set up here on the back end, and so as we do so, just want to let everyone know, hello, welcome to ANCAP Radio. If it's your first time here, make sure you follow, give us a like and a retweet for today's space. We've got a big one in store. And I'd say in advance, forgive me along the way if I have a few coughs and all of that good stuff, getting over a little flu here, but it's definitely not COVID. And we're going to talk about that in a moment once we get Tom set up. I do know that we are and for those of you who are familiar with Twitter Spaces, we're connecting him via desktop right now. So if we have to shift over to mobile device, we will do that. But in the meantime, Doug Casey might be joining us. We just found this out as well, and this is kind of exciting, actually. He's having lunch with Javier, one of Javier Malay's best friends. So in that case, sometimes you might have to postpone the arrival. We'll see if Doug can get here today, but we'll patiently await his arrival too. So I know Tom has a phenomenal presentation lined up for us here today. If you guys are not familiar with who Tom Woods is, he's a New York Times bestselling author of 13 books. His most recent, Diary of a Psychosis, How Public Health Disgraced Itself During COVID Mania. He holds a PhD in history from Columbia University. He's the winner of the Hayek Lifetime Achievement Award, and given in Vienna by the Hayek Institute and the Austrian Economics Center in 2019. His book, The Church and the Market, won the $50,000 first prize in the Templeton Enterprise Awards, and Tom hosts the Tom Woods Show, which has released nearly 2,500 episodes. And if you guys are not listeners of the Tom Woods Show as well, highly recommend looking it up, subscribing on, wherever you get your podcasts. His show has really indirectly impacted my life through what I do professionally at raisingcapital.com. I met my business partner there through the world of podcasting and Tom Woods. And I know he didn't know that until a few weeks ago when him and I connected, but it's just great how it all works, especially fundamentally through a world of libertarianism and anarchy. So anyways, Tom, it's great to have you here. I let everyone know Doug's having lunch with one of Javier Malay's best friends, so hopefully we'll see him in a moment. But if not, we've got you here, the man of the hour, and I know you've got a great presentation lined up for us today. Just want to let everyone know we are going to be taking calls around the half-hour mark. So if you do have questions for Tom or for anyone here today, please hold those for then, and then we will bring you up on stage to ask your questions, etc. But Tom Woods, great to have you here on your first ever Twitter space, which is pretty cool. I do see you're on mute right now. It looks like you can hear me. So yeah, whenever you get a chance to just unmute and introduce yourself, we'd like to pass the torch to you.
There we go. All right, everybody.
There we go. All right.
All right. Well, hey, everybody. Yeah, this is totally new to me. I feel kind of like a boomer in this situation. First one of these, but got to start sometime, and I couldn't be happier to be starting with these guys. And looking forward to having Doug Casey join us in a little while. You never know with old Doug. He's always up to something. But anyway, let's chit-chat about this. I think a lot of you folks who would follow something like this probably know the more or less the basic gist of what I've been saying. But my gosh, the evidence is just overwhelming of how right we were. And yet I'm sick and I don't know about you people, but I'm sick and tired of being right. Being right, but being right has no consequences. Being wrong has no consequences. Nothing changes. We're right, we're right, we're right. I think about the early 21st century that we're in now. And I think about what are the three most salient episodes that I can think of in terms of U.S. history, on which in each one, people each time said, I wouldn't want to be a libertarian right now, and that was 9/11 / the war in Iraq, the financial meltdown of 2008, and COVID. And each time it's, you might have libertarian sympathies sometimes, but this is an emergency, and we can't be ideological purists now. But yet, you look back on all three of those, and in fact, wasn't it better to be a libertarian? Weren't we by far the best on all these things when all was said and done? That everything they did in each of these cases made things vastly worse. So, in fact, I remember when COVID broke out, it was, oh, I don't want to be a libertarian during a pandemic, right? We can't have that. Don't want to be. I would vastly prefer to be a libertarian after whatever the hell these people were. So I ended up writing quite a bit about this as it was happening because, as I think we can all agree, we'd never lived through anything like this. And in terms of the levels of propaganda and the scope of the restrictions, and nothing been like this before. And I became curious early on about, was there anybody who didn't think this was the end of the world? And if so, who are these people? And where are they getting their data from? And so I looked around to see if I could find dissident voices. And I'm sure a lot of you will agree with me that in those early days, it was hard to find those dissident voices. It was hard to find them. But they started to accumulate. And I started to realize that what they were saying just made more sense than what other people were saying, because as the months went on, we started to get charts. And now we all know that you're not allowed to speak out of turn, right? If you have a degree in history, you can talk about history, but you can't talk about this episode. So if you have a degree in economics, you talk about economics, but you can't talk about this. Well, I don't fit into these restrictions very well. I feel like I should be able to talk about anything I want to, particularly when all I'm doing is looking at charts. And you know, anybody can look at a chart. Anybody can look at a chart and read it. And, for example, partway through this, I didn't know if maybe masks might help. I mean, I'm sorry, I was not omnipotent, or omniscient, rather. I thought maybe, I don't know, maybe they do work. I don't know, because what do I know? I don't think about these things ever. What do I know? I never, ever said to people, you should go wear a mask, but I was wondering to myself, I wonder if they work. Well, so then I looked at the charts, and you can clearly see they don't do anything, because you can compare places that were wearing them with places that weren't. Now, they would come back at you and say, hey, you can't do that. That's not valid because there are so many demographic differences between these two places. You can't possibly compare them. Okay, well, what if I compare bordering counties? Is that close enough? These people are identical. Or what if I compare one place over time as their mask policy shifts? Is that okay with the police? And you would see that it just doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. My friend Tim Scott, who I think might actually be in attendance here, was kind enough to work with me. He did the tech angle of a website we created partway through this whole fiasco called covidchartsquiz.com. And on that site, we devised a quiz based on the idea that we were told from the beginning that if you follow the recommendations of the experts, you're going to do great. But if you don't, well, you're going to get what's coming to you. Okay, we all got that, didn't we? So then we saw the charts, and none of it seemed to tell that story, that you would find two places, like if you look at charts for, let's say, Arizona, Nevada, California. Arizona was the least locked down, Nevada the second, and California obviously the most. And yet you look at their, you can look at all kinds of hospitalization charts, whatever. They basically track each other. It's basically indistinguishable. So it's not telling the story that it was supposed to. So we made this site, covidchartsquiz.com. And the idea is you fail this quiz every time you take it. Because we'll show you a chart and we'll say, all right, here are two lines, and one of them depicts the health trends in one state that did X, and here's a trend of another state that didn't do X. Which you think is which? And, of course, you're wrong every time. If you're following what Fauci told you to expect, you're wrong every time. And if you're like me, you're very academically competitive, and you don't like failing quizzes, but you fail this one. And so when it came to masks, which I was talking about just a moment ago, one thing we did there was we posted a series of charts of different European countries. And we said, all right, well, here's the trajectory, COVID trajectory. And I'd like you to pick out where on this chart you think masking came in, widespread masking. Where do you think? Do you think it's right at the height, and then when the masks came in, the numbers fell? Do you think it's there? Where do you think it would be? And, of course, it should be at the height, and then everything falls because of the masks. But it turns out that the introduction of widespread masking is completely random. It's never where you think it would be. And then, of course, we get all these other examples of parts of the country, that are heavily masked and parts that aren't. It just doesn't do anything. It doesn't do anything. And that convinced me, because I am open to being convinced of things on the basis of facts. So the overall story we got was that you get good results if you're an obedient peon, and you get bad results if you're a stupid rube and you refuse to listen to your betters, if you refuse to listen to what we laughingly call the public health establishment. And they viewed the whole world through this lens. But yet, the world just refused to conform to that lens. And so I wrote my recent book, Diary of a Psychosis, about this experience we had over the past several years, and it's just relentless. I mean, this is the thing that you got to have as a reference, because you got to have something that just shows it didn't work. I know a lot of our people want to start on chapter 37 of the story and talk about the sinister forces governing world events, and there's plenty to that. But with the normies out there, of whom there are hundreds of millions, if not billions, you have to start with chapter 1. And chapter 1 is it didn't work. You got to start there. It didn't work. I can show you it didn't work. And that all these sacrifices that were made, every last one of them was in vain. And this was a crime that can't be allowed to be repeated. You got to start there. And that's where I start. There are 2 facts. Now, in this book, there are a billion facts. It's relentless. It's a steamroller. I mean, it is a baseball bat splattering the skulls of these people over and over and over and over relentlessly. I mean, you almost feel sorry for them. Almost. You almost feel sorry for them. Okay, but you don't need to know the 8 billion facts, although since I love my folks, they're nerds. They want the 8 billion facts. That's great. You should read the book. You should go to diaryofcovid.com. which is the most beautiful book website you've ever seen in the history of the world, diaryofcovid.com.
And we do have it. We have a link to it below
Beautiful.
as well, so you guys can click it right now.
Don't forget to do it, because it's really awesome. And I have a video there. It's just 2 minutes that captures a few of the dumbest things they said, and it's like a greatest hits volume in a way. But there are only 2 facts you need to know that can parry anything your friends say, because no matter what, they'll come at you with this, that, or the other thing. But these 2 facts shouldn't be the way they are. They shouldn't be. Fact number 1 is that California and Florida exist. And California was highly, highly locked down, and Florida was not. I know because I live in Florida. And I also know because I traveled to California at one point in 2021 with one of my daughters. And so when we were in California, one of the things we did was we went to a drive-in movie, because I think I've only been to 1 or 2 of those in my life, and daughter's never been to one. I thought, well, that's something we can do, because you're not getting out of the car, so that's got to be quote unquote safe. The Department of Health, though, in Los Angeles had declared, yes, drive-in movies can be open, but no double features. What possible difference could that make? You're in the car. So it was things like that. Or when they finally allowed Disney to reopen in California at 15% capacity, they tried to establish a rule, no screaming on the rides. Like we're screaming on the rides voluntarily. So it's just absolute nuthouse, California. And meanwhile in Florida, we were having concerts and comedy shows. And, life was not completely normal, but it was as close as you could get. And so the question is, what do the numbers show there? Especially, you have to adjust for age, so you're comparing apples to apples, because we're talking about a 1,000-fold age mortality difference. And what do we find? That in terms of all-cause mortality, which is that's the key figure, because that includes all the lockdown deaths, that removes from the equation the complications of coding a COVID death, quote-unquote. You get rid of all those complications, all-cause mortality. Florida did better than California. Florida did better. It should not have, according to the propaganda we were fed 24 hours a day, but it did. And if we had asked any of the psychotic people in March 2020, if California locks down heavily and Florida doesn't, do you think which one do you think will have more excess deaths? Do you think any one of them, obviously percentage-wise, do you think any one of them would have said California? But yet it is. It is. So that's fact number 1. Second fact involves Sweden. Now, we almost got tired of hearing about the example of Sweden, because everybody would talk about it. But Sweden was a case where they said if they don't lock down by June, they're going to have 96,000 deaths. They had 4,000 deaths, so off by a factor of 24, typical of these people. But when the thing was all said and done, like their epidemiologists were saying, when this thing is all over, you're going to find that on balance, Sweden ended up doing better. And you say, oh, come on, that's impossible. But yet, the numbers don't lie in terms of all-cause mortality. Sweden did better than any European country. And it did not, it very ostentatiously did not follow what we laughingly call the public health guidance. So again, that shouldn't have happened. There's no way they can account for that. And you think, wait a minute here, Woods. Have you asked them? I mean, maybe they do have some kind of explanation. Maybe deep down in that thick skull of theirs, maybe somewhere, they do have some kind of explanation. Well, I know what their answers are, because there were a couple of times when Anthony Fauci and Andy Slavitt were asked challenging questions. A couple of times. 99.9 with a bar over it % of the time they were fawned over. But every now and then you'd get a tough question. And they were asked, or Andy Slavitt was asked by MSNBC no less. Andy Slavitt was asked, we don't understand why Florida and California are doing roughly the same when they have drastically different policies. I mean, how do you account for this? And his answer, and I've got this at diaryofcovid.com, I got it in that video. His answer was something along these lines. Well, this virus continues to surprise us. We think we understand it, and there are some parts of it that are just a bit beyond our understanding. That was his answer. His answer was, we have no blankety-blank idea. It shouldn't be this way, and yet it is. So we had, for that fleeting moment, we had that brief glimmer of humility. We don't really know what's going on here. But it was only fleeting, folks. These people are not known for their humility. It was only fleeting because immediately after saying that, we got, but we know what works, masking, and he's got the whole laundry list of things. But, oh yeah, do we? Who's we? How do we know that? Anthony Fauci was asked about this. Well, look, he was asked, Texas just reopened and seems to be doing okay. And, he had predicted that the return of college football to packed stadiums would be a feast for COVID, and the opposite happened. So what about Texas? His answer was, maybe they're doing things outdoors. Maybe they're doing things outdoors. They took the whole state outside. That may be the explanation. That's the best they can come up with. So I'm not straw-manning them. I'm not putting words in their mouths. They genuinely do not have an answer for this. Now, as this was all going on, people like the folks listening in right now, a lot of us got to know each other. And we wouldn't have known each other otherwise. But we were all people who just in our own individual capacities were looking at the results of what was being done and evaluating whether this was a sensible thing to do. And so there were a lot of lay people who made very important contributions, whether in terms of being on social media or writing newsletters or Substacks or making videos or whatever it was. A lot of intelligent lay people and also people in medicine as well began to make names for themselves. And there's one I want to point out in particular here today, and that is she's more active on Facebook than she is here. But that's a woman in Ohio named Catherine Hewig. And she did H-U-W-I-G. And she did something that is so awesome. I only wish I myself would have thought of it. And it was this. She got to appear before the legislature of Ohio. And what she brought with her was a chart laying out how COVID had progressed through Ohio and the deaths and all that over time. But what she didn't do was she did not include the timeline. So she doesn't say, all right, here's January, February, March, April, May, June of 2020 or 2021. None of that is marked. And in fact, you don't even know the length of the snippet of time she's showing you. And so the line goes all squiggly. And so she says to the legislators, all right, now, since you dramatically disrupted, to put it mildly, the lives of millions, ruined the lives of millions, destroyed their livelihoods, their savings, their health, took their lives away in some cases, there better be really, really excruciatingly obvious results of the policies you urged on us and imposed on us. So, for example, Thanksgiving had better have been a bloodbath. We'd better see a huge spike at Thanksgiving because we were told if you get together at Thanksgiving, a disaster will strike. Or if you go out and protest together, except if it's George Floyd, bad things will happen. Okay, well, whereas if you follow our advice, then blah, blah, blah. So she said, all right, well, here's the chart. I'd like you to pick out where Thanksgiving is on this chart. It should be extremely obvious and super easy. Where is it? Or how about, when did we adopt universal masking? That should be really obvious. There should be a real plummeting in the numbers there. Go ahead, pick it out for me. Where's that? Because these things better be jumping out at me on the graph, or otherwise a lot of people have a lot to answer for. And, of course, nobody can find these things. Nobody can find these things. They're all random. And this was obvious early. It was obvious very, very early. So now, as you can imagine, you write a book like this. This is the longest book I've ever written, actually. And in fact, it was so long that I decided, no, I want people to read it. This is too darn long. So I took a lot of stuff out of it. Great stuff like my heart was breaking with each section that I was removing. But I took a whole bunch of it out to make it a good, digestible, readable length. However, at diaryofcovid.com, one of the bonuses I have is all the stuff I took out, you can have it. Because I know there are completionists out there. I know you're like me, that you like a musical group, so you have all their albums. Now, I know in the age of streaming services, maybe people don't do that anymore, but you listen to all their albums. You want to know everything about them. Well, you can be a completionist at diaryofcovid.com. The other thing I did there, and then I'll wrap up and we'll see what people have to say, but the other thing I did was I was getting, because I was putting out an email newsletter on a very, very regular basis, writing about what was happening. And so people would write to me and tell me about their families were divided over this, and it was causing tremendous strain on their families about, well, you can't come over because you haven't had the shots, or you're not listening to the public health guidance, or you can't come visit me because you went to a concert. Or, I mean, people were deeply divided. But also beyond that, we were learning about elderly relatives dying alone. I was getting stories about suicide of young people who just saw no hope for their futures. The stories were just devastating. And they were sending these stories to me because they felt like, as somebody who writes about it, I could empathize. And, of course, the real problem they faced was that nobody was allowed to tell stories like that. Because if you are going to complain about our ballyhooed public health establishment, you're probably a grandma killer. And you're probably just selfish complaining about the restrictions. You remember early in 2020 we were told you probably just want to get a sandwich at a restaurant. You probably just want to get a haircut. I mean, really dumb guy kind of objections that were being made. If you complained about the lockdowns or said, look, I'm really suffering because of this, that wasn't anything that NBC News wanted to highlight. And so they had nobody to tell these stories to. So they told them to me. And I finally decided there's no book of these stories. No one has collected any of them. But if we're ever going to tell the full tale of what was done to us, these stories have to be a major part of it. It can't just be charts and graphs. I got plenty of those. I'm lousy with charts and graphs. But we need these personal stories. So I wrote back to a lot of these people and said, remember you sent me your story all those months ago. How would you feel if I included it in a companion volume to the book I'm working on? So the book is Diary of a Psychosis. I wanted to release a companion volume just of the stories. Not one person said no. They all just wanted to be heard. So I compiled these stories into a book that you'll find at diaryofcovid.com that is a companion, a free gift when you get the book, and it's called Collateral Damage. Victims of the lockdown regime tell their stories. And that's all. They wanted to be heard. They wanted somebody to hear the story. And that's why you might think, well, some of these are deeply, deeply personal, and maybe people don't want to share them. Maybe some people don't. These particular people, every one of them did, because they just wanted to feel like a human being. Like they suffered, but nobody gives a damn about their suffering. They're not allowed to tell their story. That's inhuman. And these are real people with real sufferings and real stories, and they wanted to tell them. So in that companion volume, they do tell them. From what I can tell, the first time ever. This is the first such collection. So that is my my overview. So do check out diaryofcovid.com. And now let's see what you all have to say.
Yeah, everybody give it up for Tom Woods. And if you're new or familiar with Twitter Spaces, you can see at the bottom there, there's a button to use little emojis so you can clap it up, drop some hearts, some laughing emojis, because there was definitely some funny moments there, like they're probably doing things outdoors. I guess we're doing this one indoors today, Tom, so I guess we got to be careful. But we're now going to open the floor up for callers as well. So it's as simple as tapping the request button at the bottom of the screen. If you have a question for Tom, that's all you got to do. And we'll get you up here. Again, if you're listening on the replay or new to ANCAP Radio, happy to have you here. We're live with Tom Woods today, author of diaryofcovid.com. If you haven't checked out the website yet as well, all the links are below here in the thread. Make sure you like, retweet, follow everyone up here on stage. And I see we have Kurt, who has been patiently waiting. So, Kurt, we're going to bring you up here in a moment. And then once we do, we'll get to your question. But, yeah, Tom, I think that, putting this publication together is one of those things that, because there's that feeling that they might try and do this again, right? And by exposing all of the information like this, it kind of reminds me of it's like a variation of the Freedom Convoy too. It just creates such a wave that if it was going to be attempted again, it's almost impossible, right?
Yeah, well, so this is why I there's room for all different approaches to this question, but I feel like not everybody is going to be reachable by telling them about the Rothschilds. Like some people are going to be reachable by this didn't work and it did a lot of damage. So that is what I'm trying to do. This didn't work and it did a lot of damage. And then you can ask yourself, well, why would they persist in something that quite obviously didn't work? And then you can go down any rabbit hole you want. But I want to be the entry point for as many people as possible so that if they try to get away with something like this next time, right away you will have a very considerable resistance. There will still be some parts of the world where they'll comply. Like, for example, I was getting correspondence from the Philippines where I was told that in the Philippines there's no resistance. They're just doing what the government tells them. Some of that is because culturally there's a heavy pressure to conform, but it's also because they're afraid of the government, and so they just went along. But there will be considerable portions of the world that will at the very least throw up a lot of obstacles, and I hope that this work that I've done can play some kind of role in helping people make that case, because the arguments in it are just so relentlessly overwhelming.
100%. And Kurt, I see we do have you here. So if you could just keep it concise, because we want to make sure we get everyone a chance here who's calling in to speak. But yeah, Kurt, just let Tom and I know what your question is. And also let us know where you're calling in from.
I'm in Canada. I accidentally clicked the speaker button, but thanks a lot, Tom, for all the work and great book. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kurt.
Canada's probably doomed.
Thank you very much.
Well, I'm in Ontario right now. I know that sounds crazy, Kurt, but if there's any hope for Canada, every now and then I meet a Canuck that sees the same way. So speaking of which, I know I see our next caller here is Jaffer. Jaffer, you're normally calling in from Montreal, but yeah, let us know where you're calling in from and what your question for Tom is.
Yes, hello. How are you?
Good.
Doing well. Good to see you.
Yeah, Adam, you're still in Toronto or back to Florida?
Toronto now, but
okay.
Florida in the future. Yeah.
Okay, so hello, Tom, and my question will be brief. In order to reach people, you can also talk about the Pfizer contract with South Africa. Are you familiar with that?
I know some of the details from South Africa because of my friend Nick Hudson, but I wouldn't be able to speak on it.
So I have the whole contract. I can put it in, and you can read it because it's really, really, really interesting, and it shows clearly that the vaccine was not really working. They don't know if it really works or not, and it is written black and white in that contract. Okay, so you can maybe publish a tom 2 of your book speaking about now the safe and effective, quote unquote, of this vaccine. Okay.
Well, I am interested because
Okay.
I heard a lot of reporting from South Africa from Nick because he was stuck there, and it sounded like there was a unique level of insanity going on in South Africa. But every time you think that about a particular country, you hear about another country that's even worse. But
So
if
you have
you're
to
not
know,
familiar
and
with him,
yeah, you know that the truth now is appearing every day, and every day and every year, new things will appear. So don't worry about that.
well, I appreciate this comment. I will definitely look into this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jasper. Yeah, if you want to go ahead and tweet that at Tom, I'm sure that'd be helpful too. And we're going to get our next guy up here, Mayor and Stuart. We see you and Domestic in the pipeline as well. So one moment while Mayor gets connected here.
And in the meantime, can I tell you that now that I do video with my podcast, I know I'm not on video, and yet I'm making hand gestures and speaking like I am. Like I'm even wearing a jacket. There's no point to this.
That's right. You could come as you want on Twitter Spaces. So Mayor Aaron Lamb, that's who it is. Good to see you here. What's your where are you calling in from, and what's your question for Tom?
Hello, thank you very much for hosting this space. I am the mayor of Keensburg, Colorado. It's great to speak with Tom again. I was fortunate enough to have an episode on his show after I won my election and just passed my year mark. So it's been a very exciting year, but I just saw the space and just definitely wanted to hop in and thank Tom directly for giving a voice to so many of us that did lose our jobs over terrible COVID policy that we now know in retrospect made zero sense and in fact cost a lot of lives. So I think it is incredibly important to promote this and to highlight this so that when inevitably they try to bring it on us again for some new virus or some new strain of COVID, that we are prepared and that there is a strong resistance.
Well, absolutely agree. And I'll just tell the briefest of stories. I went to Iceland a few months ago for the first time, and I flew Iceland Air. And partway through the flight, one of the flight attendants came up to me and said, and asked me like if I had a podcast or something. And I thought, that's a very strange question to ask. I said, yes. She said, are you Tom Woods? Yes. Okay, that's what we thought. The pilot would like to talk to you. He's a fan of yours. So they bring me up to the front of the plane, and he shakes my hand. He's a listener, and he had lost his job because he wouldn't take the shot. He lost his job from Iceland Air. They let him go. But then they realized, we're Iceland. We have 350,000 people in the whole place and not that many pilots. So eventually they came crawling back to him. And so there he was flying the plane again. But it was just, that was an interesting moment to be, a million miles from anything familiar to me. And yet there was somebody who had had this same experience so many people had had, with something deeply in common with me, despite, being halfway around the world. And saying thank you for, doing the best you could to get the good word out. So I appreciate that from him and also from the good mayor. I hope the Tom Woods Show bump has given a real boost to your political career, but thank you very much.
I appreciate it. And that is an incredible story. You have listeners all around the world. And I think the impact that you've had on our community and the libertarian world is immeasurable. And I am so excited to see how it continues. Thank you again.
It's really cool to see what you're doing there, Mayor. I was just looking at Keensburg, Colorado as well. To our team, if you guys could just drop just call it a Google Maps link or something to Keensburg, Colorado, that'd be cool. Keep up the good work there. Stuart Knight, good to see you here.
Yes,
Get on mute.
cool.
What's your question for
Thank
Tom?
you for taking my call. Can you hear me okay? New speaker.
Yep, and also let us know where
Awesome.
you're calling in.
Yeah, I'm calling in from Washington State. I just wanted to first say thank you so much, Tom, for all your work. I've been following you since 2006 when you were a YouTube reply guy, everybody criticizing Ron Paul. So I've been a fan for a long time.
Right. I used to make videos, defending him against the dumb things people would say.
Yeah, it was great. It was glorious.
With that. There's so many dumb things to defend him against.
Yeah, that was amazing. Anyways, I just wanted to say thank you so much for your work with the with this book and all the COVID material. you did, because like I was like one of the few people refusing to go along with it, and me and my wife would go and remove all the caution tape from children's playgrounds and nonsense like that. So thank you. My question though is, I know you've always been like, no, I'm never going to run for president, but like the LP could really use you to be the guy telling these messages. And I'm wondering if there's a time when your daughters get older, if you'd ever consider that in the future.
I feel selfish in the way I answer this question, that I don't want to, and I would be, I just have too many people gunning for me, too many jerks gunning for me, and I think I'd be spending all my time dealing with that. And I know people, Scott Horton and others have told me, you're full of it, we'll take care of those people, you just go out there and spread the good word. But I have a couple of suggestions for people I think would be pretty darn good at it. And one of whom may actually be mulling it over, so I don't want to cause problems by saying the name, and then he says, wait a minute, I wasn't ready. So I don't know, but
Sure.
I would rather be the guy in the background who's advising the guy, or helping write speeches or things like that. That I would gladly do. But I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I'm flattered. I really am, and I appreciate it. But it's just not going to happen. And by the way, I just followed you on whatever we're calling this website now.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, thanks. Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you, Stuart. Thank you. And yeah, I love that approach, Tom. It's one of those things where, I mean, you just look at some of the greatest influences that have ever, been recorded on the face of this earth, and it's been the ones that have been able to say no to politics are the ones that kind of go down in the history books. And I'm sure being the next Jesus isn't necessarily your life goal, but he was never an actual politician, right? And people like that, MLK, even Rogan, a little bit comparatively, those are guys who I think they'd actually probably damage their careers a little bit if they started playing that game. So is that the lens at which you're looking through it, or? I'm just curious as well to follow up on Stuart.
I don't know. I mean, it's not that I'm thin-skinned, because I really, the block button is very, very easily pushed, and then you don't ever have to deal with people again. I don't know. I mean, it's that also I'm not even sure that I'm really on top of my game. Like, I feel like if I was going to do this, the time would have been like 15 years ago when I was a young whippersnapper, really fast and sharp. I don't think I'm as good as I used to be. I'm not as quick. I've gotten interested in other things.
Not as quick as Biden, right?
As who?
As Joe Biden.
Oh, Joe Biden. Okay. Yeah, I mean, isn't that crazy that we live in a country where we have a guy who we all know couldn't possibly have an honest debate with any person. He couldn't explain himself, argue anything, marshal evidence. But anyway, I mean, look, somebody like, I know that there's a lot of division about Vivek Ramaswamy, but one thing you can't take away from him is that he's quick on his feet. And sometimes people think, well, that's because his answers are rehearsed. But he gives too many answers for them all to be rehearsed. I don't think they are all rehearsed. I think he's just really fast. He's really sharp, and he's really articulate. And I think I used to kind of have some of that, but for whatever reason, I think it's partly that I don't like, after a while my interest just drifted into other topics, and so I've kind of forgotten some of the stuff I used to know. So I'd have to really like bone up. I mean, so it's not impossible. I just don't want to. And I don't even know how to explain it.
Zero.
I just don't want to.
Zero pressure from ANCAP Radio on that one. However, if you did decide, we'd support you still. So I see Claus the Libertarian. You've been waiting patiently over there.
Yeah, thanks. First of all, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, just let us know
okay.
where you're tuned in from,
Yeah.
and what your question is.
Well, today I'm calling in from London. I'm on a business trip here, but normally I live in Denmark. I've had a couple of responses from Tom over email over the years, and I just want to say, Tom, thank you so much for your work. I mean, when I was exposed to I think the darkest dystopia I've ever been through as a human being during lockdowns in Denmark, which is my home country, you were really a bright light in the darkness, frankly, because that was probably the most depressing thing I've ever experienced in my life, and deeply, deeply disturbing, right?
Yes.
So I thank you for all your work, first of all.
Thank you for saying that. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and I was at the point, and I'm going to get to my question in just a second. When I was at the point, I was thinking of I should probably go to Sweden, escape, and things like that, because I was seriously nervous that they were going to try to force inject us because they were talking about things like that. Anyway, it's a long story. What I wanted to say was, and I think you may have guessed this, Tom, but what I want to say, the only hypothesis that really fits the data, and by the way, your data is really, really excellent. I remember the first time I saw it when you presented at a conference. I don't know where it was, but it was it was recorded. It was a video, and you presented something similar to what you just explained, and it was really, really good. The only hypothesis that fits the data is that there is no SARS-CoV-2 virus. And the reason, and I know this is a scientific discussion more than anything, so it does, I mean, for me to explain why that I believe that, it's a long time. But I really posit that is the only correct answer to why none of this worked and why seemingly random things also didn't work, right? And the primary reason, I can explain this very, very simply. The primary reason why I think that there is no virus is because they actually told us that there is no virus. When the PCR test document came out, the one written, authored by Christian Drozden of the Charité, and that was peer-reviewed in 48 hours in order to get the WHO to declare the pandemic and have the PCR test go out. In that document, they say no virus was available. So they could not calibrate the PCR test against an actual virus because they did not have the virus. So what did they do? They actually took a model of an alleged virus, and that is the only thing that came out of Wuhan was the model of an alleged virus. The virus itself has never been found. It's kind of like modeling climate change. In many ways, very similar. It's a completely hypothetical thing. They take millions, tens of millions of tiny little pieces of DNA, and then they stitch it together with a computer, and they say, there we go, there's a virus. But they haven't actually physically ever identified and isolated the virus. And that is why none of this works. It's because it doesn't exist. This is as a scientist, my simplified explanation of why I don't believe it. And I posit, that, at least you'd have to agree, Tom, that hypothesis fits the data, correct?
All right. Well, so first of all, trust me, I've had a lot of people write to me saying this exact thing, a lot.
Right.
And so I finally decided that I would have, because the guy it was easiest for me to connect to who held that thesis was Mark Bailey. Because it turns out Mark Bailey is actually interested in Austrian economics. He has Human Action by Mises.
Right.
So, so we had a little bit of a, like I had kind of like an entry point philosophically with him.
Mm-hmm.
So I had him on the Tom Woods show. Did you hear that episode?
I think I heard some of it. I know him very well. I mean, I don't know him personally, but I follow him a lot, so I know exactly his point of view and how he presents things. Yeah.
So I had him on just because but partly because I knew that this is an extremely minority opinion, and of course, it's the kind of opinion that nobody even acknowledges you if you have that opinion. And I thought, I've been treated like that in my life with opinions I have that are perfectly well founded.
Yes.
So I'm not going to act like the way people have acted toward me. So I'll have this guy on. We'll hash it out. But the thing is, you may think this is a cop-out, but my view on it is, and you're right, that does fit the data. You're absolutely right. But honestly, if somebody else, the problem is because I know so little about this angle on it, if somebody else came along 5 minutes later with 12 reasons Mark Bailey is wrong, I'd be convinced by those. And then he'd come back, and I'd be convinced by that. So it's like a novice theologian listening to a Calvinist and a Jesuit argue about justification. You would think the Jesuit was right, and then you would think the Calvinist was right, and then So I remain agnostic on this, which is more open-minded than 99% of the public. So I don't feel like
which I think is the right position. Yeah.
I don't have grounds.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I just at this point I refuse to dismiss. The one of the difficulties I have with it is that given I know that I'm sure this can be answered, but one of the difficulties I have with that kind of hypothesis is that it means that all the medical journal articles, like all of them, talking about this, where physicians are talking to each other about things that work and things that don't work, that this is all describing a phantom, and like they're so locked in the paradigm
Yes.
that not one of them says we're all talking about a phantom? I mean, like that wouldn't happen in entomology. That wouldn't happen in like this. Now, so maybe there's something wrong with virology. I'm willing to consider that. But
Yeah, I think there is. I
we
think
don't
it's
write
based on
articles
wrong
about something that
assumptions.
doesn't exist. It just seems hard to accept.
It is extremely hard to accept. It took me a long time to actually come to that conclusion, because in the beginning, it's very, very hard to believe that that is the case. But if you actually look into the so-called science, it doesn't follow scientific method, first of all, and all the assumptions are typically the same for any of these virological papers, and all you have to do is one thing, and that it would prove that the assumption is wrong, and then all the papers are basically just junk. And this is one of the things that Mark Bailey and others, by the way, Tom, I want to say, this is not a new thing. There was a group of people, I think in the 1980s, called the Perth Group, who very, very actively campaigned scientifically. These are scientific people, medical researchers, campaigned against the notion of the existence of an HIV virus. They had very similar arguments, right? So this is not something new. It's just something that has been systematically, obviously disqualified, because the opposite side is so massive. I still contend that the science is extremely poor, and for a large part fraudulent. What has happened, this is based on 50 years of stuff, right? So it started actually back in the 1950s with John Enders and measles and stuff like that, right? But over the past many years, this idea of being able to model a virus, and then they say, we have a model of a virus, therefore it exists. This is not science. This is not science. It's the same thing as saying we have. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I'm just saying this is great, and I'm just wondering if you do have some resources too, because we want to make sure we get some other callers to drop any resources you have in the Twitter thread as well.
Yeah, no, I'll do that. So Mark Bailey is definitely the best one. I'll drop a resource in there. So I don't want it to take all the time, but I wanted to mention this because I'm a scientist. It took me a couple of years probably to come to terms with this, right? But I just don't believe this is science. And the thing is, the virologist will not debate this with a person like Mark, or there's a number of other people that have similar point of view. They refuse to debate this. Why do they refuse to debate it?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Klaus, and it is
welcome.
Definitely an interesting take. So drop the resources you have for us, and we'll take a look. And
Thanks, Tom.
I love
great work.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I love our next caller's name here, domestic terrorist. So you're on the mic. Let us know where you're calling in from and what your one question is.
Hello, guys. I'm calling from San Francisco, and Tom, thank you for your hard work. I attended the event in San Juan Capistrano and also your 2000 recording in Orlando, which was amazing. Here's my question. I've been waiting for months in San Francisco for people to turn around and tell me, you know what, we got screwed. They really should pay for it. This should never happen again. And what do I get instead after all this time? Leaving aside that I see way too many masks outdoors downtown San Francisco where I work, what do I hear? Get over it. Stop talking about it. You're annoying. We did the best we could. Move on. Enough already. Right. Can you comment on this attitude? Because part of me despises this attitude. Part of me is jealous of these people that they moved on.
Yeah.
That's it.
Well, it's very easy for me to comment on that because I received an email from somebody who had that exact opinion. I had sent out a very typical issue of my email newsletter. I think it was critical of something Moderna had done. And this person said, look, man, we've all moved past this. We're out living our lives, and you're sitting here still miserably complaining, and you should just knock it up. And he was saying, I don't know how he was still getting my emails, because he was saying that he had given up on me for my unreasonable position. And I thought to myself, well, when has it ever worked in history where we've said something inexcusably wicked was done by the government, but let's just get over it and forget about it and move on? And so, in fact, I even invented a fake Thomas Jefferson quotation. The quotation went something like, if the government does something evil, just get over it. And then I attributed it to Thomas Jefferson, because we all know he would never say something like that. Unfortunately, sarcasm is lost on even a handful of my own subscribers, because I actually had a few people writing saying, I don't think Thomas Jefferson said that. Yeah, no kidding, he didn't. For one thing, I don't think in the 18th century they had the expression "get over it," but all the same, yeah, I think. See, I look at this as a historian. I think about other episodes in history where we got something wrong, but the wrong version of events became the conventional wisdom. So the Great Depression, that's because, if you have unregulated capitalism, you get the Great Depression. That's wrong, and we're still trying to fix that, and that has consequences, because policymakers today will say, well, you have to understand the government has to spend a lot of money, or otherwise, what we learned from the Great Depression. That is not what we learned from the Great Depression. It's what they want us to think we learned. And so then we go into I wrote a book, Meltdown, about the 2008 financial crisis. Well, the conventional wisdom about that is that, that just goes to show when we give you stupid rubes too much freedom, look what you go and do. You blow up a housing bubble. And then we act like the Federal Reserve System is not even there. Like, this is the thing that creates money, and then it's not there. So, and you can easily imagine in the future, we have another downturn. People say, well, remember what happened in 2008? And they'll draw all the wrong lessons from it. So the thing we don't want to have happen here is that people go on and think, well, we had this problem in 2020, and a lot of stupid people delayed the resolution of it because they wouldn't listen to the wise public health bureaucrats. But those wise people gave us great advice that ultimately, slowly, but ultimately resolved the problem. If that's the point of view you want to take root, I don't know what to tell you. But if you don't care either way, then I don't know what to tell you. I mean, if you really don't care, then I don't have enough in common with you even to debate it. Like, I don't even care. So I just unsubscribed to this person. Like, the person said to me, if you keep this up, like if you write another email like this, I'm going to unsubscribe. And I felt like, I'm not going to be threatened by my own subscribers, you creep. So I wrote back and said, no need, I already unsubscribed you. And incidentally, it is very nice to be in that position where I don't need these people. I don't need somebody like this guy. I can live a very happy, successful life without this guy, so I can tell him to take a hike, and it's no problem. So, yeah, I don't know what to say other than the reason I'm still on it is that I've seen what happens when we just drop something and just let it go. The other side's point of view just wins by default. And then finally, I mean, think about what is a U.S. history textbook going to teach about this? It is almost certainly going to teach the Fauci version. In defiance of the evidence, it will teach that. I mean, imagine, what is the textbook going to say about Ukraine? What's it going to say about the Russian collusion hoax? It's going to be entirely mythology. And so a whole generation will read about the past 4, 5, 6 years, 7 years, and they're going to learn absolute non-facts. And so since I don't want that to happen, I just try to teach the facts that I know.
And it really just shows you, I mean, it makes you question everything in the history books leading up until this moment, right? At least in the government indoctrination camps, schools. So domestic terrorists, thank you for hopping up here. We're going to get to our final caller here, libertyportal.com. Great to see you here. Could you just unmute? Let us know where you're calling in from and what your question for Tom is.
Yeah, hey, I'm calling in from Montana right now. Hey, Tom, this is Henri Pellerin. It's good to talk to you again.
Yeah. So glad to hear from you.
Yeah, I just wanted to take the opportunity to say hi and to let you know that I bought 2 copies of your new book. I gave one to my dad for Christmas, and he was so excited to get it. So if anybody's looking to get gifts for my dad, apparently Tom Wood's books are things that make him happy. I haven't read the book yet because I've committed to finally finishing reading Man, Economy, and State this year. I'm all the way on page 1035 right now, so I only got another 300 or so pages to go. But your book is going to be next on my list. So yeah, that's really all I wanted to say. Just wanted to say hi, and tell you I'm looking forward to reading the book.
Well, I really appreciate that. It's great. Henri spoke at an event I had about a year ago for my School of Life, tomschooloflife.com, and he spoke on fitness, and he was talking about different things you can do that some of which, like, there are a million possible routines you could have and exercises and whatever, but some of them are going to benefit you, and some of them are either not, or you're going to risk injury, and he was helping to distinguish between the two, and he was absolutely top notch. In fact, I think when you left the stage, I think I said some curse words describing how good you were.
Yes, it was the proudest moment of my life. I will never forget.
You were so fantastic. So anyway, well, thank you so much. It's great to hear from you, and I appreciate the support.
Thanks, Tom. All right, see you later.
Thank you.
Thank you, Liberty Portal. And we're going to go ahead and bring this one down for a landing, just like the lovely pilot out of Iceland did. And we also want to remind everyone who tuned in here, maybe hoping to see Doug Casey today. He had a last-minute appointment with someone who's a very close, I would maybe even argue, best friend of Javier Milei's. We didn't get to talk a whole lot about Argentina today, Tom, but have you been? I'm sure you've been keeping up with the excitement down there.
Yeah, I did an episode on it with a couple of people with connections to Argentina. One of them lives there. And, I know that there are people who will say, well, what about this and what about that? But I really do think that's a case of sometimes our side just refuses to take yes for an answer. I think this is a case of we've had a win and we're so unaccustomed to having a win, we don't know how to handle it. So we have to conceptualize it as a loss. I don't think it is a loss. I think it's a very good thing.
Yeah, but if you go through our thread here, excuse me, on ANCAP Radio, you'll see within the last couple of weeks, we had Luis Kenny on, who did an entire hour on Javier Milei. He's been in Argentina his whole life. He's an attorney, very well-spoken, phenomenal presentation. So make sure you check that one out. Follow ANCAP Radio. Most importantly, if you don't already, follow Tom Woods and check out the links below. If you haven't gone to diaryofcovid.com yet, go there right now. Check out Tom's book. And Tom, just thank you again for investing your most valuable time resource with us here today, your time. Any key takeaway for you from today's conversation?
Well, I'll just say that now I feel completely at ease doing these. Anytime you do something for the first time, you worry, well, maybe I won't know how to unmute myself, or maybe I don't. Maybe no one will be there, or whatever. But I should have guessed it would be user friendly. So now I'm ready to do this. With other people and with other topics. So I appreciate you getting me out of my comfort zone and onto one of these.
Yeah, it's great to have you here, and we'll talk offline, but we'd love to have you back on, and hopefully at a time where Doug's not out to lunch. I do see we have our other co-founder, Dave Henderson, here in the audience today as well. If anyone here doesn't already follow Dave, definitely do that. We like to joke and say he's New Zealand's most wanted. He actually wrote a book, Tom, called Be Very Afraid, which is about I think it's the IRD, basically the New Zealand version of the IRS, which got picked up by, I think, Anthem Film Festival. But anyways, Dave, thank you for all you do. Tom, thank you for being here. Again, everyone, like and retweet this Twitter space, and we'll catch you next week here at 3 p.m. Eastern on ANCAP Radio with Dave Henderson, actually. He is our feature next week. We're going to go a little bit deeper into his background, what got him to where he's at, and also talk about the Guy Fawkes Award. If you don't know about that, stay tuned. Tom, thank you again.
Thanks.
And we'll see you in the future.
My pleasure.